Good luck, gentlemen. Well, let's see. Bachelor number one is a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the dark room at the age of 13, fully developed. Between takes, he might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Please welcome Rodney Alcala. Rod, welcome.
Rodney Alcala, the handsome, smooth-talking bachelor who stole the spotlight and won the dating game, seemed like the man of every woman's dreams. Charismatic, mysterious, and just the right amount of danger. But something about him was not right. Beneath that facade was a darkness no one could see. By the time he appeared on TV, this seemingly perfect man had already claimed the lives of 2 other women. The date he won refused to come with him. Little did she know, she had just escaped the worst nightmare of her life. What drove a man with such charisma to commit such unspeakable acts? Who was he? This is the story of the dating game killer. Rodney Alcala's story begins in San Antonio, Texas. Born to a Mexican-American couple, Raul Alcala Bucor and Ana Maria Gutierrez, Rodney was the third of 4 children. His childhood seemed pretty typical, maybe even a bit promising. But things took a strange turn early on. In 1951, Rodney's father decided to uproot the family and move them to Mexico. And then, just like that, he abandoned them 3 years later. He was just 11 years old when he watched his father walk away. Maybe that was the first crack in Rodney's otherwise normal life. In 1954, his mother, Anna, did what she could. She moved the family to suburban Los Angeles, hoping for a fresh start. Now, despite what you might expect, Rodney wasn't the outcast or the troubled kid in school. In fact, he was considered academically gifted and fairly popular among his peers. He even had the whole well-rounded student thing going on. He was on the yearbook planning committee, ran track, and was part of the cross-country team. From the outside, Rodney seemed like your typical high schooler, maybe even a bit more ambitious than most. But as we know now, looks can be deceiving. After graduating from Montebello High School, Rodney joined the U.S. Army at the age of 17, hoping to become a paratrooper. But something wasn't right. You see, Rodney was far from the model soldier. His commanding officers described him as manipulative, vindictive, and insubordinate. He even got in trouble for assaulting young women, and you'd think that would have raised some red flags. But instead, it was brushed under the rug. In 1964, Rodney hit a breaking point. He went absent without official leave and hitchhiked from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, back to his mother's house in California. After what was described as a nervous breakdown, Rodney was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder by a military psychiatrist. They even tested his IQ, 135, which is pretty high. Rodney was discharged from the Army on medical grounds, but the story doesn't end there. His diagnosis didn't stop with antisocial personality disorder. Over time, it was revealed that he had a whole lot of them: narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and even malignant narcissism with psychopathy and sexual sadism thrown in for good measure. In other words, this was a man with deep, dangerous flaws that most people couldn't see on the surface. But Rodney wasn't about to let his military failure slow him down. He bounced back in a way that seemed almost unbelievable. After leaving the Army, he enrolled at UCLA and graduated from the School of Fine Arts. His life was full of contradictions. On one hand, he was this accomplished, charming, even creative guy. But beneath the surface, there was something very dark, very wrong. Rodney had already begun weaving his twisted web of horror. It was a regular September morning in 1968, the kind of day where nothing felt out of place. Tali Shapiro, an 8-year-old girl on her way to school. A man pulled up beside her in his car, offering her a ride. She refused, just like her parents taught her. But when he mentioned that he knew her family, her small bit of doubt kicked in. She thought maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe she's safe. That man was Rodney Alcala. What happened next was beyond imagination. Alcala lured Tali into his Hollywood apartment under the pretense of showing her a picture. A passing motorist named Donald Haynes saw something that didn't sit right with him and decided to call the police. It was a gut feeling. When the police burst into Rodney's apartment, what they found was horrifying. Tali was there, alive, but only just. She had been brutally beaten with a steel bar and assaulted. Her small, broken body lay on the floor, barely clinging to life. Rodney was gone, having fled moments before the police arrived. Tali was in a coma for 32 days, battling for her life. But Rodney wasn't about to stick around for his punishment. No, he had other plans. To escape the warrant for his arrest, he slipped out of California and reappeared on the other side of the country, this time under a new name, John Berger. He even had the nerve to enroll at NYU, studying film under Roman Polanski. But it didn't stop there. In 1971, under the same false name, he landed a job as a counselor at a New Hampshire arts camp for children. And if that wasn't terrifying enough, during that time he also worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield, sharing an office with none other than serial killer Richard Cottingham. Two monsters in the same building, yet completely unaware of each other. He can only hide for so long. In June 1971, Rodney's name resurfaced. Cornelia Crilly, a 23-year-old TWA flight attendant, was found dead in her Manhattan apartment. Rodney had strangled her with her nylon stockings, leaving her lifeless in her new apartment. It's believed that Cornelia had accepted his help while moving furniture. Her murder remained a mystery for decades, a cold case that haunted investigators and her family. No one knew about Rodney, but he was now on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. His face was plastered on posters everywhere. But the crazy part? It was two kids at an arts camp who noticed him on an FBI poster at their local post office. And just like that, Rodney was arrested and taken back to California. But by this time, Tali's family had moved to Mexico, and her parents didn't want their daughter to testify against him. Without Tali's testimony, the authorities couldn't charge him with assault and attempted murder. Instead, he was convicted of child molestation and sentenced to a measly 3 years. He was paroled after just 17 months, and as if that wasn't infuriating enough, less than 2 months after being released, he was back in handcuffs for assaulting another girl. Once again, he was sentenced but was paroled in 1976 after serving only 2 years. But just when you thought that things would settle down, something really strange happened after his second release. His Los Angeles parole officer, perhaps feeling a bit too lenient, allowed Rodney, now a repeat offender, to travel to New York City. Just a week after arriving in Manhattan, Rodney struck again. Ellen Jane Hover, a 23-year-old woman, the daughter of nightclub owner Herman Hover, and a goddaughter to stars like Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., was last seen on July 15, 1977. Her datebook had a note about meeting someone named John Berger that very day. Investigators caught wind of Rodney's past when a tip came through about how he had been arrested years earlier for the Shapiro case in New Hampshire. When they questioned him about Ellen, he admitted he knew her, but they couldn't pin anything on him since her body was still missing. But eventually, Ellen's remains were found buried beneath heavy rocks, near a location connected to Rodney's photography sessions. Now, you'd think he would lay low after this. But no, in 1978, he worked as a typesetter for the Los Angeles Times. He was ruled out as a suspect, but he didn't stay out of trouble for long. He was arrested briefly for marijuana possession. This continued for a long time, and he even convinced hundreds of young men and women that he was a professional fashion photographer. He took pictures for his portfolio, telling the girls that their moms had asked him to do it. It sounds innocent enough at first, but many of these photos were explicit, and most of the subjects remained unidentified. Police were left wondering if some of these kids were additional cold case victims. This guy was a master manipulator, using his charm to lure in unsuspecting victims under the guise of art. But then, just when you thought he couldn't get any more unpredictable, Rodney did something completely unexpected for a killer like him. He entered a game show called The Dating Game, completely unhinged from reality.
Who got his start when his father found him in the dark room at the age of 13, fully developed. Between takes, he might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Please welcome Rodney Alcala. Rod, welcome. And it's time to meet our young lady for game number 1, and here she is. Here is a young lady with a wealth of experience. She once earned a living massaging feet, but she quit when her boss suggested that she work her way up.
In 1978, Rodney joined in as a contestant on this popular game show. Host Jim Lang introduced him as a successful photographer. Between takes, he was described as someone who might be skydiving or motorcycle riding. The show didn't even run background checks on their contestants. So there he was, this charming guy, ready to woo the audience while hiding a dark secret. Now let's talk about the Bachelorette, a young woman named Cheryl Bradshaw. She was looking for a match and had no idea that the man she was about to meet was a predator. Ellen Metzger, the show's contestant coordinator, even found Rodney attractive and thought other women would love him too. Rodney, appearing as Bachelor number 1, quickly became a hit with the audience.
Bachelor number 1.
Yes.
What's your best time?
The best time is at night, nighttime,
Why do you say that?
because that's the only time there is.
The only time? What's wrong with morning, afternoon?
Well, they're okay, but nighttime's when it really gets good. Then you're really...
How creepy is that, especially knowing what we know about him now?
What are you called and what do you look like?
I'm called the banana, and I look really good.
Can you be a little more descriptive?
Peel me.
Later, Bachelor 1, later.
Welcome back to the dating game. And Cheryl, we have reached the moment of truth, as we call it. You've heard from the bachelors. You got some great dramatic presentations, some good answers. But now I'm going to ask you a question. Will that date be Bachelor number 1, Bachelor number 2, or Bachelor number 3? Who gets the dates?
Well, I like bananas, so I'll take 1.
Number 1, Bachelor number 1. All right.
She picked Rodney. They were supposed to enjoy tennis lessons together, followed by a trip to Magic Mountain, the famous Six Flags amusement park in California. Sounds like a fun day, but something in Cheryl's gut didn't feel right about Rodney. The next day, Cheryl called Ellen and said, "I can't go out with this guy. Weird vibes are coming from him. He's very strange. I'm not comfortable." Jed Mills, who competed as Bachelor number 2, had a gut feeling too. In the green room, Alcala had boasted, "I always get my girl," and Mills said that right away he didn't like this guy. Cheryl's intuition saved her from becoming Rodney's next target. The dating game was just a small piece of Alcala's dark puzzle. After his infamous appearance, he dove headfirst into a murder spree, completely unbothered. Let's start with Jill Terry Barcombe, an 18-year-old girl on November 9th, 1977. Her body was found discarded on a dirt path near Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles, posed in the knee to chest position, and sadly nicked from the waist down. It was horrifying. There were signs of assault, and she had been strangled with a pair of blue rope ties. Fast forward to June 24th, 1978, 31-year-old Charlotte Lee Lamb, a legal secretary from Santa Monica, was found dead in the laundry room of her apartment complex in El Segundo. She had been assaulted, beaten, and strangled with a shoelace, and left with her hands tied behind her back. The DNA at the scene matched that of Rodney. Then on February 14th, 1979, Rodney picked up 15-year-old Monique Hoyt, who was hitchhiking in Riverside County. What followed was a nightmare. He drove her to his apartment and assaulted her. They then ventured to a secluded area near Banning, California, where Rodney took pictures of her in her undergarments and continued to assault her. He bound and gagged her, and in a horrifying turn, he struck her in the head with a rock. Miraculously, Hoyt managed to escape when Rodney entered a gas station bathroom on their way back to Riverside. She bravely filed a police report, but Rodney's mother posted his bail, allowing him to slip through the cracks once again. And then there was Robin Christine Samso, just 12 years old, who disappeared on June 20th, 1979, while riding a borrowed bicycle to her ballet class. Her decomposing body was discovered 12 days later, dumped off Santa Anita Canyon Road in the Los Angeles foothills. She had been beaten, attacked, and stabbed. Friends told police that a stranger had approached them on the beach, asking them to take their pictures. Detectives circulated a sketch of this photographer, and Rodney's parole officer recognized him. When authorities searched Rodney's mother's house in Monterey Park, they uncovered a piece of evidence, a rental receipt for a storage locker in Seattle. Inside, they found Lamb's earrings, tying him directly to another victim. As the pieces started falling into place, it was clear that Rodney was not just a suspect. He was a cunning predator. The net was closing in, and with every horrifying detail revealed, you couldn't help but wonder how much longer he could keep his facade intact. The tension was building, and it felt like we were hurtling toward a dramatic showdown. Little did Rodney know, his time was running out, and his dark reign of terror was about to come to an explosive end. And yes, eventually he got arrested in July 1979. But right after that, he found himself in a whirlwind of trials and legal battles. So he goes on trial for the murder of 12-year-old Robin Simpson. He was found guilty in May 1980 and sentenced to death in June. Just when you think justice is served, the California Supreme Court steps in, overturning the verdict in 1984. Why? The jurors had been improperly informed about Rodney's past sexual offenses. Fast forward to May 1986. Rodney goes through another trial, virtually the same as the first, but this time without the jury hearing about his previous crimes. He was convicted again and sentenced to death in August. Is he really a mastermind, or just a lucky guy slipping through the cracks of the system? While authorities were preparing for a third trial in 2003, they discovered something mind-blowing. Rodney's DNA matched semen found at the crime scenes of 2 other women in Los Angeles. Suddenly, investigators realized that Rodney is not just a one-hit wonder. They find more evidence, including another cold case match in 2004, which leads to Rodney being indicted for the murders of 4 more women. In between these trials, Rodney wrote and self-published a book called You, the Jury, claiming he was innocent in the Samso case and suggesting that someone else could be the real culprit. He even filed lawsuits against the California penal system for a slip-and-fall incident and for not providing him with a low-fat diet. Now for his third trial, Rodney decided to represent himself. He took the stand and played both interrogator and witness for 5 grueling hours. He rambled on about how he was at Knott's Berry Farm applying for a job as a photographer when Sam So was kidnapped. He even showed off a clip from his 1978 appearance on The Dating Game to prove that the earrings found in his Seattle locker were his, not Sam So's. As one actor who competed against him put it, "I'd never seen a man with an earring back then. I would have noticed."
Testimony from anyone other than Mrs. Frazier that Robin's ears were pierced. None of her friends were aware of that. They were unaware of her wearing earrings. And Mrs. Frazier had plenty of opportunity to provide you, the jury, with a picture of Robin wearing earrings. He stated on the stand that she had pictures of Robin, and if Robin, like she says, wore earrings all the time, that was her habit, then there should be some earrings, some pictures with earrings, and there should be some person who isn't familial to testify that Robin wore earrings. However, no one testified other than Mrs. Frazier that Robin wore earrings.
As the trial progressed, Rodney didn't even try to argue against the 4 added murder charges. Instead, he claimed he couldn't remember killing any of the women. In his closing argument, he even played Arlo Guthrie's song Alice's Restaurant, where the protagonist tells a psychiatrist he wants to kill. It was bizarre, to say the least. The jury didn't take long. Within just 2 days, they found him guilty on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. During the penalty phase, a psychiatrist testified that Rodney might have a borderline personality disorder, which could explain his lack of memory about the murders. But the prosecutor painted a different picture, one of a sexual predator who knew exactly what he was doing and didn't care. Fast forward to March 2010, and Rodney was sentenced to death for the 3rd time. But the story doesn't end there. In June 2012, he was sent back to New York. Initially, he pleaded not guilty, but by December, he changed his plea to guilty, wanting to get back to California to appeal his death sentence. On January 7th, 2013, a Manhattan judge handed down an additional 25 years to life. As if this nightmare couldn't get any worse, in March 2010, the police released 120 of Rodney's photographs, hoping to identify potential victims. And approximately 900 additional photos couldn't be released because they were too explicit. Within weeks, about 21 women stepped forward, identifying themselves, and several families recognized loved ones who vanished years before. All these trials and retrials didn't seem to bother Rodney at all, but eventually time caught up with him in a way the laws couldn't. On July 24th, 2021, at the age of 77, he passed away from natural causes in a hospital in Kings County. Just like that, after all the horror, the games, and the endless legal battles, Rodney's life came to a close. But even in death, his story lingers. Just as you thought things could get any better, there are rumors that Rodney Alcala may have been part of a larger underground network of killers. They speculate that his photos, the ones found in his locker, weren't just trophies, but part of something bigger, a chilling, coordinated group of predators. Could Rodney have been linked to more unsolved cases than we know? And were his crimes only the tip of an even darker iceberg? It leaves us questioning how many others like him are out there. But what do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments section below and make sure to subscribe for more.